Welcome back, students, to another psychology lesson. Today, we are going to discuss some of the most complex processes of human beings, processes that probably are the justification for humans being at the so-called top of the ladder: cognition, language, and creativity. That is, thinking and all that involved in that, and not just in terms of words, but even in terms of graphics, pictures, what we think of in our minds, images, language, and creativity. Now, I must warn you also, or at least advise you, this is a relatively short lesson. I think there's certainly fewer than 50 slides in this. If it isn't clear to you by now, psychology is a very new science. So new that we're just scratching the surface. And cognition, language, and creativity is where the rubber hits the road. We know what's going on, but on a macro level. We're getting lower and lower and lower in resolution, or higher in resolution, that is, looking at exactly what's going on neurologically, but the systems that are involved and what they, how they interact back and forth, our brain systems, are so complex and so numerous that we haven't done the research yet. We don't quite have the technology yet, or even the analytical capabilities yet, in order to fully comprehend how we think, language, cognition, and creativity. So this lesson, I'm going to discuss these processes. And again, it's a macro level, how these processes actually occur on a micro level, on a second-by-second basis. That's something that we're in the process still of learning. So stay tuned for the next 50 or 100 years, and we will have learned a lot more than we know today in psychology. This is a field that is going to advance probably more than any other field that we know today. Anyway, let's proceed. So first of all, let's think. What is thinking? You ever think about you ever think about what I'm doing? Think about what I'm thinking. What is thinking? If you take a higher position of thinking, look over yourself like you're an eyeball looking down at yourself, and you look at you thinking. Now, what is that? What is that? Specifically, cognition is a it's an internal mental process. It's a representation of either words or pictures or expressions or problem or situation, but it is an internal representation of how you've learned to represent experiences. Now let's become more specific. What, for example, is an image? An image is a picture-like mental representation. A concept is an idea representing a category of objects or events. Language is words or symbols and rules which combine them. So it's words or symbols and it's rules that combine them. Now that's such a simplistic, such an abbreviated definition. It's not even a definition. It's just sort of a grouping process that says, okay, now let's go from here. So in thinking, what is involved in that? Of course, language is. There's oral discourse and composing and research and decision making and comprehending and principle formation, thinking. So complex cognitive processes include conceptual understandings, and we're going to talk about what a concept is. What is thinking? It's decision making and creative thinking and critical thinking and an analysis. Problem solving can be learning and insight and following specified steps and algorithms and heuristics. All of this we'll talk about during this lesson. Okay, so now we've talked about what an image is. It is a mental representation. Now, synesthesia is the ability to create images crossing normal sensory barriers. Or in other words, one can imagine seeing music. One could imagine smelling the ocean, although the ocean does have some smell. Well, let's say smelling red, or smelling a color, something that wouldn't have a color. So you could see that in this process, one can attach or associate senses and characteristics to concepts that would otherwise not have those. And this is also part of a creative process. Side note, there are some physiological maladies where an individual may actually see music or see sound. Very, very rare. And we're not talking about disorders, psychological disorders. We are talking specifically about one's ability to create images crossing normal sensory barriers. In a mental image, we can mentally rotate. We can rotate an image, and of course now we have software that where if you draw something or bring an image in, you can rotate the image in the software. But our brain, your brain can rotate an image. You can look at something front on, and then in your brain rotate that in front of you along one axis, let's say the x-axis, by 90 degrees, and now you're looking at the top of it. We can retrieve images from our memory. Now, those aren't exact photographic images, but they're images. And not only that, but it could be an image from yesterday. It could be an image from far, far into your past. We can create images. And we also have what are called kinesthetic images, which are created from a musical sensation, a kinesthetic image. A musical sense. And you've seen lights also that respond to music, not only the musical volume, but also the wavelength of the music that's going on. So there's a lot of characteristics associated with one's mental image or mental imagery. Now, what is concept formation? It's the process of classifying information into meaningful categories, because that's what we do. We classify almost everything into categories. Even the number system itself, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, is a categorical system that does not exist except with us. So concept formation is a process of classifying information into meaningful categories. Positive instance, an object or event that belongs to a concept class. So in other words, it's like, so if an object belongs to a certain set, then that's positive. And if it doesn't, then that's a negative image. So what a conceptual rule is a guideline for deciding whether objects or events belong to a certain concept class. So in other words, one concept would be round. So as you're looking at images passing you and you're making decisions, then you see a block go by you. Now, by whatever the definitions of round are, the block is not. Therefore, that is a negative instance. It's not. Then a tire goes by you. Whatever algorithm or heuristic defines that which is round, and round is a concept. I mean, you ever think about it? What does round mean? A round doesn't necessarily have to be a circle. Doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect arc. You could almost describe anything as round. So what do you say is round? Well, round isn't straight. All right, I'll go for that. So then we're looking at straight round. All right, so we go down further and further and further in our concept characterizations, and we start very, very young in creating concept characterizations so that by the time we're adults, we have complex concepts that, and we have almost forgotten, they're out of our awareness now, how they actually began, but they're built on more and more and more and more and more foundational development and learning. So what are some types of concepts? The conjunctive concept is a class of objects that are defined by the presence of two or more features, like a rabbit is white and furry, although not all rabbits are white. So if you saw a hare, let's say a wild hare out there, would that be a rabbit? Well, yeah, it would. So maybe the white and furry only refers to certain contexts around Easter or something. Relational concept is based on how an object relates to something else or how its features relate to another one. And that may or may not be true as well. For example, a relational concept might be things that fly with wings. Okay, yet still a bird and an airplane are not of the same, are completely different classes. So that might fail us as well. So you can see that we have to combine rules or types of concepts as well. It's not just a cut and dry process. What is a disjunctive process? Objects that have at least one of several possible features, either or concept, like a strike in baseball. Okay. Prototypes. Now, prototypes are wonderful. Before I became a psychologist, I may have mentioned I used to be an engineer, an electronics engineer, and that was my forte. I did prototype engineering and developmental engineering, and this drawing here of a prototype is I think wonderful, because as you can see, okay, there's a basic tree. Now, that's the prototype of a tree, and some of these other fillings you can then ascribe to a tree. And in the same sense, I've got this little cartoon over here, the prototype of a wheel. So it's the original type or form instance that serves as a model on which later stages are based or judged. It's an early and typical example. That's what a prototype is. Now we talked about concepts. What are some faulty concepts? Faulty concepts that one must be aware of. Be aware of your thinking. Step outside yourself sometimes and think about what you're thinking about. For example, what is a social stereotype? It's an oversimplified concept of a group of people. And especially when complex entities like people become oversimplified, it's wrong. The concept is simply faulty. Another type of faulty concept I run into also quite frequently in psychological in therapy and in working with people with diagnosable mental disorders. This is all or nothing thinking. This is particularly true of people who are depressed. And this classifying things as absolutely right or wrong, good or bad, fair or unfair, black or white, honest or dishonest, always or never. And people who have this kind of, well, it's either this way or no way. That is not true at all. That's not how the universe works. It's not how the planet works. It's not how we work. It's not how nothing works. It's a faulty concept. And the problem with this concept is that it continues to rule people's lives. And therefore, they stay in conflict and stress. Well, why? Because they believe in something that's not real. It prevents us from really appreciating the subtleties of everything. Talk about connotations. Connotation is a principle one needs to really be aware of when one is dealing with semantics and meanings of words. All right, so let's talk about the difference between denotation and connotation. The denotation is the dictionary definition. It's the objective meaning, whereas a connotative meaning has an emotional or personal meaning to a person or usually to a group. Connotations can be, let's say, in a couple. They can have a certain experience that they had in the past, and then they see a similar experience, and they look at one another and smile because that has a certain connotation. Connotations can be cultural. Words or idioms that we have are connotative, many of them. And so I put this cartoon down here as an example. So these two employees are discussing, and she says, "The weasel I went on a blind date with last night had some nerve to tell me." So the person she's talking to has the mental image, as you can see here, of a weasel. So she says, "Wait, a weasel talked to you?" Now, basically, I think we all know when we refer to someone as a weasel, but again, this is the idea of connotation. And also, it's also, in a way, an example of black and white, because clearly she should know that weasels don't talk. Anyway. What is language and all the different little parts of it? Maybe when you've been arguing or you've heard somebody or watched somebody discussing or arguing an issue, and they'll come back and then one person says, well, that's an issue of semantics. So what is that? Semantics is the study of meanings in language and words. It's important. If you have one meaning and I have another meaning and we're trying to make a point, well, it's not going anywhere unless we're talking about the same meaning. The linguistic relativity hypothesis is the idea that words we use not only reflect our thoughts, but they shape them as well. Words we use not only reflect our thoughts, but shape them as well. So what is that saying? That basically that words that we use, we learn from. They reinforce and or punish our behavior. They will inhibit or support, reinforce behavior. That's essentially what that is saying, is that our words feed back into our thoughts and our behavior and our thoughts and so on. And it's an interactive process. That is possible. Many people believe in linguistic relativity, and that can go so far even as not only just thought, but language in and of itself. Or in other words, those who speak a different language, especially if it's written differently, will have different concepts or different processes by which they form, the individuals form concepts. And I could see that could be as well. How we perceive things is linguistic relativity. Does language we speak shape the way we think? There was a movie, and I put this here just to relate to that movie. And darn it, I can't remember the name of the movie. It was recently aliens visited the Earth, and basically they were there to bestow a new language upon us, which would therefore offer us the ability to continue to evolve. Darn it. Well, I'm sure you'll remember it, but that was the image that was in the movie. The structure of language, of almost all languages, includes phonemes, which are basic speech sounds of language. Phonemes, we start with phonemes at age, I don't know, like when we talked about development, we could start with phonemes very, very early, 2 months, 3 months, ba, 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 and sort of thing. Phonemes, first of all, consonant phonemes, and then later cooing, and also using vowel sounds. Anyway, phonemes. Then morphemes are speech sounds collected into meaningful units like syllables or words. So a word would be a morpheme. Grammar is a set of rules for making sounds into words and words into sentences. So we use grammar in order to set the words and the function of the words in the proper order so that as we read or write them, it creates the concept that we want to remember, grammar, that is writing, reading, all of this is what? To create and then express a concept. And if the grammar is incorrect, if the morphemes are incorrect, if there's no meaning there, or if the meaning is wrong, then the concept won't be expressed. So grammar is very important as well. Syntax are the rules for the word order in the sentences. So it's not only word order, but now, so grammar is syntax is within grammar. So syntax is a part of grammar, and that is putting the words in the proper order, as well as having everything conjugated correctly so that its concept is relayed correctly. It's not a matter of sounding educated or highfalutin or anything like that. It's so that people understand you. Transformation rules are rules that allow us to change a declarative sentence into other voices. So in other words, passive or active voice. The conductor took the ticket from Mary. Okay, versus Mary gave the conductor her ticket. Mary gave the conductor her ticket, that's active. The conductor took the ticket from Mary, that's passive. Or the ticket was taken by the conductor, that's even more passive. Gestural languages, I'm sure that we're familiar with, not necessarily to speak it, but we're familiar with what sign language is. Now, animals communicate as well. So while animals communicate, they don't necessarily do so by language. So, for example, I'll give you some examples. There were 4 of them. So when Vicky was learned to say 4 words, and then I think Washu learned to say 240 ASL or sign language symbols. Sarah learned 130 plastic symbols and learned also the proper word order. And Kanzi learned 250 lexicograms, which were arranged in some sentences as well. Now, the interesting thing about speaking is that humans, we have a different vocal tract anatomy. And so for us, it makes us so that it's easier to speak, but then it makes it more dangerous to eat, and we choke sometimes, especially if you don't chew your food and you're gulping. Mechanical problem solving. And remember, I mentioned the word, a few minutes ago, heuristic and algorithm. So let's talk about how do we solve problems? How is these problems? I'm not talking about some word problem that you get on a math exam or something. It's just any day problem. How is that solved? There is a mechanical solution, and that is it's achieved by trial and error or by some fixed procedure. And or there is an algorithm, and that is a learned set of rules that always leads to a correct solution or of a problem. And I mentioned to watch that word always, and indeed, even if you're following this little algorithm here, and this is just a little program, okay? So and so lamp doesn't work. Okay, you turn the lamp on. Okay, boom, doesn't work. Lamp plugged in. No, plug in the lamp. Now what this should say is then okay, lamp doesn't work, plugged in, yes, okay, now it's plugged in. Yes, it's plugged in. Now what? Bulb burned out. Yes, replace bulb. No, repair lamp. So this entire little that's a computer program. That's how we write code. We have solutions by understanding. Now, what is? Notice we're defining, operationalizing words that sometimes are more connotative than denotative, even though it should be the other way around, especially with something like understanding. What is understanding? It is a deeper comprehension of a problem. You need to have a problem, have an understanding for problems that can't just simply be solved mechanically. There's no straight if this then this, if this then this, if this then this answer to go to Mars. Can't do it. So we need to have a deeper and deeper and deeper understanding of every single step involved. And then as one goes, we say, we're missing a step even. So sometimes you don't even know all the steps you've got to take until you have a very deep understanding of a problem or situation. And the more complex the problem or situation, the deeper the understanding. A general solution states simply the requirements for success, but it doesn't have enough detail for further action. We run into this all the time. There's a general solution for graduating, going to school, getting an education, graduating, and going out and getting a job. And that will then give you, that's the requirements for success. Right? It's very general because there's a lot of details missing there. And then there's a functional solution, which is just simply a workable solution. I mentioned this word heuristic. So heuristics is a strategy for identifying and evaluating problem solutions. So it is a strategy for identifying and evaluating solutions, okay? So you have solutions. Now let's identify and evaluate those solutions. Here's another term that I'm sure you've used quite often or asked somebody for their insight into an issue. So what is insight? Insight, a sudden mental reorganization of a problem that makes the solution obvious. Have you ever had an aha experience? Have you ever had that sudden exclamation as you're driving or walking or doing whatever, and it's a problem that you have thought about for maybe the last week or month or whatever, and all of a sudden it comes to your mind and you're not putting any kind of obvious effort or awareness into it, and bingo, you've got it. That's that sudden mental reorganization of a problem that makes the solution obvious. So sometimes people call it a serendipity. Selective encoding is selecting information that's relevant to a problem while ignoring distractions. sometimes we have a problem doing that. And then selective combination is connecting seemingly unrelated bits of useful information. Selective comparison, comparing new problems with old information or with problems already solved. Fixations. This is it's an interesting issue. What we call functional fixedness, and I put this on here. Fixation is a tendency to repeat wrong solutions or to become blind to alternatives. So when there's no obvious solution to a problem, do you sit and stare and say, okay, I'm just going to stop now, or are there other solutions that could be employed if you simply take what's available and use them for something else? For example, here's a hammer, using it for a paperweight. Here, I mean, I'm not sure if you can see that or not. Here's a drill and some scissors that are stuck into the drill and tightened into the drill. And the scissors, there, as you can see, they're going to be used as mixers and mix up here what's in this bowl. So the scissors are now the mixing blades. This is an interesting one also. You can see here is a grill. They didn't have a grill, but they did happen to have a shopping cart to put over the fire, and just using the mesh of the shopping cart as a grill. I mentioned I was an engineer a long time ago, and I remember I had a boss. His name was Dennis, and he said he would, I don't think he said fire, but greatly chastise anyone who did not use a tool properly. Well, then that means that you're functionally fixed. If I can't use a screwdriver to pry open a jar, because a screwdriver is meant to screw screws, right? Functional fixedness. What are some barriers to problem solving? Barriers, that's what they are. All of these are barriers. Emotional, like some inhibition or fear of making a fool of oneself, a cultural barrier, or a belief that a fantasy is a waste and feelings and humor have no place in problem solving. Or learned barriers, maybe taboos. They're big taboos, and staying with conventional or cultural or context uses in wisdom, so-called wisdom, or perceptual barriers that are habits that lead to a failure to identify important elements of a problem. What is the difference between an expert and a novice? It is not that one is smarter than the expert is smarter or more intelligent or anything. No. Experts are better problem solvers than novices because they have acquired more strategies. It's trial and error. They've been hurt more. They have more specific organized knowledge. They're better at intuitively recognizing patterns because they've done it over and over and over again. And they're better at automatic processing because you do something over and over and over again. You don't have to think about how to do it. So it's automatic, fast, fairly effortlessly thinking based on experience. What is creative thinking? Different types of creative thinking, all different types. It's not just one. It's the inductive thought, for example, is going from specific facts or observations to general principles. Is one a domain that creative thinking draws on. Deductive thought is going from general principles to specific situations. It's another domain. Logical thought is going from given information to new conclusions based on explicit rules or heuristics or algorithms. Illogical thought is thought that is intuitive, associative, or personal. Okay, so now you see this here. General principles we can deduce into specific instances, and then those specific instances then go back into general principles. How do we rate creative thoughts or creative thinking? How's it rated? How are you going to measure? Somebody says, okay, let's do a test of creative thinking. How do you do that? How do you measure it? Well, fluency, number of suggestions you can make. Flexibility, number of times you shift from one class of possible uses to another. And originality, how novel or unusual your solutions are. There are also thinking styles. Convergent thinking are lines of thought that converge on an answer. So that's conventional thinking. Convergent thinking is conventional thinking. Divergent thinking. Many possibilities are developed from one starting point. So, for example, daydreams involve divergent thinking. There are some tests of creativity, some very specific tests of creativity, and I mentioned that just a couple slides ago. Here are a few of them. One is called the unusual uses test. Find as many uses for an object as possible. Now, of course, functional fixedness would get in the way of that. Then there's another one called the consequences test. List all the consequences that would follow if a basic change were made in the world. Some basic change. Then there's the anagrams test. Make as many new words as possible from the letters in a given word. See, any of these do exist in order to test creativity. But again, creativity exists along so many domains, you'd have to match or apply the test to that creative domain. What are the stages of creative thought? When does it start and when does it end, if ever? Orientation is defining the problem. Preparation is gaining as much information as possible, which sometimes we do our entire lives. Incubation is, while the problem isn't apparently being worked on, it's still cooking in the background. I know I do that all the time with things that I'm trying to solve, or if I'm writing something. Somebody will look at me and say, "Hey, you're not doing anything." Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm incubating. That idea is cooking. So it is a very important part of creative thought and problem solving. The next part is the illumination, and I mentioned that. That's the serendipity, the aha experience, the rapid insight into the solution. And the verification, testing and critically evaluating the solution. Depending upon the thought and goal, this process described here can be an hour long, a day long, or a decade long, or even a century long. It depends. Is there such a thing as a creative personality? Okay, well, let's talk about what creative people do and don't do. That is really one of the best ways to define anything. That is that a dog? Yeah, well, what does it do? And then you list the thing. What does it not do? And then you list the things that it not do. Like it barks, it chases cats, it doesn't meow. All the other things that dogs do. So we're going to do the same thing for creative people. Creative people don't necessarily have higher IQs. They usually have a greater than average range of knowledge and interests. They are open to experience, enjoy creativity as an end in itself. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a poet or a painter. And they value their independence and prefer complexity at work. In other words, a creative person probably is not going to do well on a production line stamping widgets one at a time for 8 hours a day or whatever. There's another word we haven't, you know what it is, we just haven't talked about it much, and we don't really know what it is. Where's that come from? Intuition is a quick, impulsive thought that does not make use of clear reasoning or formal logic. It's, I feel it in my gut. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It's intuitive. What is a representativeness heuristic? Giving a choice greater weight if it seems to be representative of what we already know. A base rate is an underlying probability of an event. Framing is the way a problem is stated or the way it's structured, which in fact can, and it should have been the first thing on this list, that in and of itself can determine the problem and how it's solved, just in the way it's stated and the way it's structured. Advertising and marketing does that to us all the time. How can we enhance creativity? Break up mental sets and challenge assumptions. That's one thing you can do. If you do things like this, you might want to do it sometimes alone or with a certain friend that you know accepts challenged assumptions. Otherwise, you might start losing friends and family if you start to challenge assumptions, especially ones that are dear to friends and family. You can define problems broadly. You restate problems in different ways. Seek varied input. Take sensible risks. You're not going to learn anything if you don't take sensible risks. And not necessarily life and limb, yet risks. It could be to your ego. It could be to a risk. Allow time for incubation. Don't be impatient. Let it sit. Don't just reject any idea, and delay, which goes along with allowing time for incubation. Delay evaluation. Now, I'm sure you've heard the term brainstorming also, and we're talking about brainstorm. Let's brainstorm this, let's brainstorm that. I've been in more brainstorm meetings, and the first thing somebody in the meeting does is put somebody else's idea down. No, that's not what you do in brainstorming. Brainstorming is a technique to produce and evaluate ideas, and the ideas are freely generated. A participant's ideas trigger ideas from others. So the whole idea of brainstorming is not to make a list, is not to solve a problem there. No, it's to get this interaction of cross-stimulation. So what do you do or not do in successful brainstorming? Absolutely, and notice I said this first, absolutely do not criticize ideas until later in the session. Now, you can't do it, but not till much later in the session. I remember when some guy said, make the wings out of concrete. And I looked at him, but I didn't say anything. So, until later. Modify or combine ideas freely. Try to generate lots of ideas. Let your imagination run amok, literally. Record ideas as they occur. I wouldn't do that in writing if I were you, because that distracts you from thinking and coming up with ideas of your own. And elaborate or improve on the most promising ideas. But that's later. That's when you give them more heuristic weight. Elaborate or improve on the most promising ideas. But the idea of problem solving is not something that is totally chaotic. It is something that you can approach in a very organized manner the most complex ideas. And then later, if you get into research methods, this is Psych 1, but if you get into statistics and research methods and move further and further along, and research methods is, in fact, the methodology by which we state a hypothesis, that is, here's a problem I want to solve, and then go about a process of solving it in a very useful and very, very successful manner. So I think that we can live more creatively. We can find something that surprises you every day. You can make a commitment to doing what you do well. You can always look for challenges, and you can look at problems from any different viewpoint. And I've got a comment on looking at problems from many different viewpoints. I know many people now, we've all got our feeds. We all know exactly what we want to see and what we want to look for. You know something? That does nothing but hamper creativity and problem solving. If one camp's looking in one direction and another camp's looking in another direction and another camp's looking in another direction, what are we going to do other than now we've got all, and there's no one brainstorming everything. So for creative solutions for everything, we need to have problems viewed from all different viewpoints. I think that's it for today, and I will sign off for now.